you know what, everybody needs to understand and have a little grace. And so I try to exercise that in my work today. There are challenging moments, obviously.
Welcome to Midlife Mixtape, the podcast. I'm Nancy Davis Coe, and we're here to talk about the years between being hip and breaking one.
Where do I belong? Tell me why I'm here and what's taking this long. When can I move on?
This episode of the Midlife Mixtape podcast is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/midlife mixtape. Over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. And hey, one of those 180,000 titles is my book, The Thank You Project, Cultivating Happiness, One Letter of Gratitude at a Time. It's about a year I spent writing thank you letters to the people who had helped, shaped, and inspired me up to that point in my life, and it gives readers a blueprint for doing it themselves, as well as the science behind why gratitude and happiness are so tightly coupled. I hope the book will be a tool to help readers emerge more gracefully from the pandemic. So if you want to check it out, go to audibletrial.com/midlife mixtape for your free audiobook. Hi there, people of the dual cassette boombox. I'm Nancy Davis Coe, creator and host of the Midlife Mixtape podcast and author of The Thank You Project. If you used to wash your bubble yum down with a tab and maybe flip through your wacky packs to see if you got one of their free toes cards, this is the podcast for you. I hope all of you who are listening who are moms had a wonderful Mother's Day, and if it was a hard day for you for any reason, I'm sending you a big squeeze too. It's the first year I don't have anyone to send a Mother's Day card to, and I knew it would be weird, and it was. Holidays, man, they're complicated in midlife. But I had today's episode to look forward to, and I'm so excited for you to hear it. Before I get to it, though, I'm going to make a request. If you happen to listen to this show via Apple Podcasts on your iPhone, would you consider writing a review? I checked the other day. I haven't had any new reviews up there in ages. So if you haven't written one yet, I'm hoping you'll consider doing that. It makes it so much easier for potential listeners to join the party here. And wherever you listen to the Midlife Mixtape podcast, if there's a way to leave a review and you feel compelled to do that, please do. You know, throughout this pandemic, I've been fascinated by the ways in which this horrible, awful, no good, very bad time has supercharged innovation and sped up solutions to long-standing problems, whether it's getting vaccines into arms in a record time, or moving homeless people into hotels, or making online learning more effective and engaging. But nowhere has it been more apparent than in the way performing arts organizations have pivoted and morphed throughout the pandemic. My guest today knows a thing or two about pivoting, although in his world, I think that's referred to as pirouetting. Christopher Dennis is currently in his 10th season as the production director for the San Francisco Ballet and has been working in the performing arts industry for over 20 years. Prior to his relocation to the Bay Area, he served as the resident lighting designer and lighting coordinator at the National Ballet of Canada for 14 seasons. As production director, Christopher sits on the executive team and manages 4 labor unions. In addition, he oversees all of the technical logistics on major ballet tours, both nationally and internationally, to places like Copenhagen, New York, Italy, Paris, Moscow, Beijing, Shanghai, Sun Valley, Idaho. Most recently, Christopher was executive producer for San Francisco Ballet's 88th virtual gala season and their 2021 digital season's dance film Color Forms by Miles Thatcher and Wooden Dimes by Daniel Rowe. So let's turn down the house lights and tune in to what Christopher Dennis has to say. Welcome to the Midlife Mixtape podcast, Christopher Dennis. I'm so pleased to have you here today.
Oh, it's my pleasure to be here. Thank you for asking.
I know you've got a lot of wisdom to share with this audience of folks in the years between being hip and breaking one. So I'm excited to learn more about your work. But we always start the podcast with one critical question. Christopher, what was your first concert and what were the circumstances?
My very first concert was the Jacksons. And it wasn't the Jackson 5, but it was the Jacksons. So at that time, I think it was all 6 brothers. It was, I don't even want to try to name them again. But
Tito.
It was Tito, Marlon, Randy, Jackie, Jermaine, And Michael. So I
I
got
think
them
you
all.
got it.
I got them all right. So it was the Jacksons, and it was the Destiny tour that they did, which was, I shouldn't say, I don't know if that's the last tour they ever did together, but it was one of the biggest tours that they did together. And that was my very, very first big tour. And circumstances, it's hard to say. I was young.
How young?
I must have been in my early teens. I believe it was my aunt who got the tickets for myself and my brother and my cousin. And I'm from Toronto, Canada, so it was at a outdoor venue called the C&E Grandstand. And for any of you Canadians who lived in Toronto at that time, the C&E Grandstand was this, at the time, was this very cool stage. But looking back, it was this portable stage that like literally rolled out onto the baseball field.
We all had lower expectations in the 70s, though. Like that kind of thing was still impressive.
Yeah, it was very impressive. And I just remember seeing that concert, and, Michael Jackson was in his heyday with his brothers. And, at that time, there wasn't a lot of major Black tours happening. They were one of the biggest at the time. So as someone of color and living in Canada, and a tour of that nature rolled in with the headliner, Michael Jackson, and the Jacksons, that it was pretty special, pretty impressive. And yeah, it was fantastic.
Do you think it had anything to do with you deciding to work in entertainment and work in such a creative field?
Well, at that time I was in my early DJing stage. I used to DJ a lot. So it was a great way to make income, go to parties, meet a lot of great people. So my brother and I and some friends, we were DJs. My father was a DJ, and on a part-time level. So music has always been an instrumental part of my life. And through DJing and its technical aspects of audio, and if you wanted to step it up, lighting, it was kind of my first introduction to sort of putting on, as a DJ, especially in today's world. I mean, these guys make millions of dollars compared to what was going on back in my day. But it was one of the stepping stones into the performing world, playing music and going to concerts and stuff like that.
So, for those of you who don't live in the Bay Area, you may not know that the San Francisco Ballet performs at the War Memorial Opera House, which is just a stunning piece of architecture directly across from our gold-domed City Hall. And it is a really special place to see ballet, of course, but it's also an amazing place to see the rare rock concert, because every once in a while there'll be an act that actually performs in this symphony, this kind of majestical symphony-like hall. And I wondered, Christopher, do you get to go to those shows, or, in the before times when there were shows? Did you ever go to any of those, or were you involved in them? I'm wondering if there's any that really stood out to you.
No, my tenure, I've been in the Bay Area just over 10 years now. Mm-hmm. And the majority of my time spent in the Opera House is working on ballet. And then the few times that I went to the Opera House not to work on ballet was to go see an opera, because when the ballet's not there, it's the opera. So there's very small windows for, at least in my time here, for other bands or concerts or events to happen in there.
I'm going to flex for a minute, Christopher, because in 2008, I got to see David Byrne perform there. It was the first time I'd ever seen him perform, and it was bonkers. It was a great, great show. And it was so weird, kind of, because you're sitting there nicely dressed in these beautiful chairs, and he's up on stage, and that's what made it cool, was just kind of the juxtaposition of the rock music and the hall. But at the end of this terrific, amazing show, the back doors open, and from the lobby in marches the Extra Action Marching Band, which is San Francisco's own homegrown, kind of burlesque, kind of steampunk, very raunchy marching band. And they accompanied him on Burning Down the House. And I'm pretty sure the Opera House levitated about 6 inches off of Van Ness Avenue in that moment. So,
well, that explains why it's still kind of off kilter someday. So that
explains why they were like, we don't like concerts anymore. That marching band scared us. Well, Talking about your work at the ballet, Christopher, let's start by talking a little bit about what your role is as production director. What exactly do you do on a day-to-day basis?
Well, I tell some people on a day-to-day basis I manage egos.
How's that go?
I'm still writing a book on that. Um,
Ooh.
but in all seriousness, as the production director for the ballet, I work closely with the artistic department, and I basically manage a department that is responsible for providing all of the production elements you see on stage, from sets, costumes, lighting, hair, makeup, point shoes that the dancers wear, like their costumes, the floor they dance on, anything technical that you see on stage falls under my purview. And with that, I have a fantastic team of individuals who help me manage all of those things. So I oversee the whole project, or all of the ballets from a production standpoint, but I work closely with the artistic director in ensuring the needs of the production, and we're kind of like a service department in that respect. I do sort of tell people sometimes it's like being a project manager. You're told, here's the ballet that we want to do, and then I work with my team to manage all the expectations from A to Z to get us from the rehearsal to opening night performance.
It seems to me that if you and your team do your job well, then we will never think of you. We will never have cause to notice anything but the art.
Correct. I mean, it is one of those things that when the production itself runs flawlessly, which is what we aim for all the time, patrons leave there in awe. And it means we've transformed their world. We provided something that was truly magical. And yes, if things don't go right, you will notice it you'll definitely notice it.
Right. Right. So you talked about how you got your early start as a DJ. Was this kind of the direction you always thought you would go, to ballet in particular? Or I'm curious how you ended up working in the ballet world.
Well, it's an interesting story. I mean, DJing was just a passion and love. But, back in the day, especially in the early 80s, I never thought of DJing as a career. And when I look at where DJs are today, clearly there's a handful that are doing exceptional things. But it was a hobby. It was a way to make money. And just like I said, my love for music. But even just as equally, or just as important, was architecture. And I had a real passion for drawing and architecture. And so through school, especially my early high school years, I was really focused on, I want to become an architect. Mm-hmm. I want to design, I want to construct. And so I had a real affinity for that. I just loved the technicality of drawing and lettering and the preciseness and the detail. And so I thought, I think I'd like to be an architect. And then, college was coming up, and unfortunately, math wasn't my strongest. And it was one of those things that, you needed to have a pretty strong background in math. But
Sure.
I enjoyed the artistry and not so much the math around it. But
Mm-hmm.
It was still important. And to make a long story short, architectural school, at least at that time, seemed like a huge hurdle. I sort of pivoted to the world of theater, where I thought I could still take this passion of architecture and performing and stuff like that, and design for the theater, for stage, and design sets. I thought, there's a real relationship there with architecture, and it's not a permanent one either, because in architecture, when you're designing a building, it's for a
hopefully it's going to stay up for a while.
Yeah.
You want that.
Yeah. Whereas in theater, it's not permanent. It's very temporary. I applied to theater school in Canada, more specifically, the technical theater production program. I went to Ryerson University in Canada, and that's where I studied technical production. And in doing so, like many courses that people take, whether it's art, being a lawyer or a doctor or whatever it is, when you want to focus on something, you're also introduced to a number of related subjects that sort of help and shape where it is you're heading. And so in going to theater school and wanting to design for scenery, I was introduced to stage management, prop building, carpentry, and lighting. So all of these different facets that help put a production on. And I went in there headstrong. That set design is the only thing I want to do. I don't care about props. I don't care about costumes. I don't care about anything. I just want to design sets. And as a student, you start to focus on the things that you want to do. I worked closely with the set design instructor, assisted him on many of the school productions. But while working on set design and studying in school, lighting design was another one of the courses that I took. And I was really actually fascinated and also enjoyed it. And it seemed to come natural. Like I actually ended up having to work harder in the profession of set design because there were things that I didn't anticipate just in terms of some of the research and stuff like that. Going back to taking the lighting design courses and understanding light and color and the impact that has, I remember doing an assignment where we had to listen to music, which once again, going back to my DJ, I love.
You were real sad about that assignment.
Yeah, so we had to listen to music and then we had to pick colors and sort of create a mood with lighting that represented the music, that interpreted the music. And I was just like, I love this exercise, right? Like, I love this exercise. It just was a natural thing. I didn't work as hard. And that's not to say, oh, this was easy, but I just enjoyed it so much that it didn't feel like hard work as opposed to set design, which is what I really wanted to do. All that to say, I did my lighting assignments and I enjoyed it. I focused on my set design. And in my graduating year, that was when the school, they put together a production and the graduating students and other students from the different years come together, and it's a student-based production.
Mm-hmm.
And doing all set design the whole time, I just assumed I'm going to design the set for the main stage show. Like, this is a no-brainer. What else would I? Everybody knows, right? Because I said it. And, in the school, there's a call board. So I went to the call board to see. It's kind of like auditioning for a show to see what part you got. And I look at the call board and it says Christopher Dennis, lighting design for choreographic dance works. And I went, what?
So Ryerson basically picked your career for you.
I was like, what is going on here? I was so livid. I marched upstairs to the production manager, who was a faculty member who put the assignments together. And I said, Peter, what is going on here? Why am I not doing a set design? Why am I doing a lighting design? And he said, well, your instructor in lighting thought you'd be good at this, and this is something that you should do. And I was like, what? I was like, what? So, okay, well, I'm not happy about this, but I'm going to do it. I was assigned the lighting design for the choreographic workshop, which entailed 8 or 9 different works choreographed by student choreographers, right? And as I started to do the work and work with the choreographers, and once again, in dance, the choreographers are inspired by a piece of music.
Right.
And then they create their choreography based on the music, or at least the music leads the steps. And so it's a very abstract world. And, in going back to the assignment that I had with the music and the lighting, this still appeared to be like, okay, I can do this. It wasn't what I envisioned myself doing right now. I should have been designing a set, but I can do this. And
I want to go back to Christopher of that year and go, just let it go. Let it go with the set design.
Yeah.
Move on.
Yeah. And ultimately, I did let it go. And I have to tell you, it was an amazing experience. I earned a whole other level of respect for dance. I actually just really embraced it and enjoyed it so much because of the artistic freedom that I had as a lighting designer. You truly support and bring the visual support to the dance. And that just really resonated with me in a way that I didn't anticipate in my career. And then literally my first job out of college was working for a small ballet company back home in Canada. I got my fair share. I was the technical director, set designer, lighting designer, prop. Like, I did everything. It was jack of all trades because it was a small company and they couldn't afford to have all the various people working in those disciplines. But the number one reason for actually working with the ballet company was because I knew I was going to design lighting, and doing all the other elements of what they asked me to was just a means to an end. It was just like, I'm going to design dance, but if I design it, what do I need to do? Oh, you want me to stage manage, build the scenery, the props, I ended up having to do a number of different things, of course, with other individuals, but I was responsible. What's interesting is My very first job out of college was a technical director for a small ballet company. It was like 6 or 7 dancers, where I had to manage all the different aspects of the company's production. And now you fast forward to here we are today, many years later, and I am now the production director of a major ballet company.
So it's interesting having had that job, I assume in your 20s, and now I also
Mhm.
assume in your 40s, somewhere in that middle sector. How do you think you approach it differently as someone who is older and wiser?
I think what it's allowed me to do is be a little bit even more open and receptive and patient with people's understanding of what they want to do. And it's also helped me bring them along in what they want to do. Like I have a much better understanding and appreciation as to the kinds of questions I need to ask in order to get them to where they want to be.
Mm.
And also a patience that, some days I fall short, but also a better understanding and patience for people's learning curve. I remember in my earlier lighting design years, I was the assistant for many productions, and then I was given an opportunity to design a show. And so through this process as an assistant, I was working with the top designers, assisting them, and they had the top crews. And then when I was given my opportunity as a lighting designer, as the assistant, I wasn't given the same level of crew. And so the individuals I was given, they weren't as skilled. And I was upset because they were making mistakes. And I really kind of just blew up. And when I say blew up, I don't really get upset, but I felt like, hey, what's going on? Like, how come they can't do what it is I'm asking? And the stage manager pulled me over and said, hey, they're learning just like you are right now.
Hmm.
And I was just like, all right, I've just been told. Because at that
Right.
time, I didn't think I was like, I'm designing. They should know because I've watched their people know. And so that was a valuable lesson that I just kind of, to myself in my head, I was just like, you know what, everybody needs to understand and have a little grace. And so I try to exercise that in my work today. There are challenging moments, obviously, just because of the level at which we work at. And so there's expectations now that are much greater, and for all the right reasons, too.
No, it's a kind of generosity that can come with having been through it yourself and looking back and saying, I remember how it felt in that role, and I'm going to make it as easy for the person going through that as possible.
Yeah. And by making it easy, it's just not kind of turning a blind eye, but just making sure you're asking the right questions and figuring out what is it that I need to support, and just kind of listening just to understand the fullness of everything. And I
Hmm.
think as a production director and over my years of doing this work, I've just, you really, because people look to you for the answers. And sometimes in a very short amount of time, you're making a lot of quick decisions. So it's having that discerning eye, that discerning ear, where you're listening for specific things, you're looking at specific things, and you're making the decision on that spot.
So I have to tell you, there is no comparison in any world between this, but it just reminded me of our girls danced at Oakland Ballet School for 10 years, and my husband volunteered backstage for the Nutcracker every year, and he characterized it as stretches of utter boredom punctuated with moments of extreme terror. Because
Yeah.
when the bear needed the bouquet to go on stage, if you didn't have that bouquet ready, and this was like a commercial banker backstage just trying to do his best and trying not to screw everything up for the kids. And I always
Yeah.
thought that was hilarious. But
Well, and that level of pressure actually becomes tenfold when you go on tour and you're now given less than half the time you would normally be given to put a production on stage
oh yeah,
in a country where English is not the first language.
oh my gosh.
And so my career has once again has taught me to figure out how to communicate so we can get what we need done.
I can't even imagine the challenge that comes with that, but exciting too, I suppose.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, we have to talk about how the pandemic has impacted SFB and like obviously like many arts organizations, you could not do the thing that you are there to do, which is to entertain people in person. So can you talk a little bit about how San Francisco Ballet has adapted to be able to continue delivering beautiful ballet to its patrons? And I'm really curious to know if there are things that you were kind of forced to do over the past 14 months that turned out to be something that you think will continue going forward? I think a lot of us are like, oh, I never would have started doing this thing had it not been for the pandemic. And now I'm going to keep doing that. So curious to know how that lands for you.
Yeah, the performing arts and the world of entertainment has really taken a hit with this, especially the live performance. And so from the ballet's perspective, once we understood COVID, and of course, in learning about this, San Francisco Ballet was, I believe, one of the first arts organizations in the country to be shut down because we were on opening night of a performance and all of a sudden, boom. And then we were told this was our last performance and the next day there would be no show. And at that time, when that information came down and everybody was understanding there's this disease, there's this pandemic, nobody anticipated the length of how long this was going to be. I mean, we thought, oh, we'll be out for 2 weeks. And then we thought, oh, maybe another 2 weeks. And then 2 weeks turned into 2 months. And so I guess when it became really abundantly clear was when all the shelter in place orders came in and we realized that nothing's happening and it won't be happening for a long time. Obviously, our development team kicked in and put together a huge fundraising efforts, critical relief fund, so that we could keep people working, keep the doors open as we continued to try to figure out what our next steps were. And knowing that revenue wasn't going to come in, we wanted to keep the workforce happening still. It was just a real challenging time. But I think once we understood and it became clear what we needed to do, which was to somehow keep the dancers in shape and keep them rehearsing so that if and when we're called back to duty, so to speak, they'll be ready to go. And in doing so, one of the first things that we needed to actually get together was a sort of permission from the Department of Health to allow our dancers to rehearse, right? Because if the dancers aren't rehearsing, we're not going to be able to do anything.
Right. I mean, I was thinking about that because we talk a lot on this show about concerts and going to indie music venues and all that stuff. Those artists can perform. Of course, it's not the same thing, but they can stream a concert. But you cannot do a pas de deux by yourself. You can't do that from home.
You can't. So of course, there were weeks where dancers were doing class, which is their conditioning, as any athlete, they would do their class in their kitchen or their bedroom. And it was all done through Zoom. And we figured out how to get a teacher and a piano all through Zoom and that people could log in from their home and take ballet class so that they continued to stay in shape. And although it was exciting and sort of innovative to figure out how to do this, it started to wear thin because athletes don't train in their homes. They need to be in a facility that allows them to do the things they do, whether you play basketball, football, or whatever sport, and ballet is no exception. The dancers needed to be in their space. So a task force was put together to figure out how we get, at least the first step was to get the dancers back into studios. And so a lot of research was being done, some consultation, and then ultimately we put together a proposal to the Department of Health using some of the guidelines and information from what professional teams were doing and putting it together in a way that lent itself to what we do in the ballet world, and put together a proposal to the Department of Health so that the dancers could at least take class in the studios.
And when was that? I mean, when did you get that clearance at least?
I want to say it was in August that we got clearance for them to do class together, or at least have class in the studio. And so once we got approval for class, I mean, dancers still, they were masked, all the protocols, temperature checking, all of those things. And we actually had to mark out the studio with I think it was 12-foot boxes. Basically, we couldn't accommodate the full company the way we would normally do for a class. So we offered a series of dance classes for the dancers throughout the day so that people could come in and actually physically be in a studio and be able to move and jump and do the things that they would normally do. And with those protocols, they literally had to come prepared in their ballet rehearsal outfits. They were given a section to put their bags down. They would take class and they'd literally pick up their bags and they'd walk out the building. There was no locker rooms. There was no showers. There There was nothing. They entered through one door, exited throughout the other door. So we started to put in these protocols just to get them in a position to at least condition and take class. So as that was happening for a while, we realized that we're not going to be able to perform for a live audience. So it became clear that we needed to offer a digital option, and at that time, the word pivot was like the cool word. I think when people hear it now, they like, if I hear that word one more time, I'm going to lose my mind. But at that time, the idea was to figure out how we can capture what we do. And so there was a combination of like, what can we capture? And more importantly, what did we have in our vault? Like what kind of archives? What did we have that we could actually package and start to distribute to the public so we can just stay relevant in people's minds? And so we're very fortunate that we do a lot of archival captures. And those captures are really meant, as the word says, archives. They're an archival capture of our performances that are used primarily for teaching purposes. Okay. So the captures are done really well, but they were never intended for public viewing. But because we had a library of ballets that were archived and that were relatively new, like had been done in the last 2 years, we had to get permission from our different unions, like musicians, dancers, crew, and even designers, special permission that we stream these videos just to stay relevant. So we weren't even charging people. We were the artistic director, Helgi Thomason, curated, here are the videos I'd like for us to show at different times. Mm-hmm. We would send that to our audiences. Oh, and, I forgot to mention, I can't believe I forgot this. Right after we were told that we weren't able to perform anymore after our opening night of Midsummer, not knowing how soon we were able to perform again, we all rallied together and we actually did a capture of Midsummer. And
Midsummer Night's Dream, not the horror movie that my family watched recently. That one doesn't play so well in a ballet, but
that's right. Everybody rallied together, and through our partnership with the San Francisco Opera, they have a very lovely media suite that's built into the Opera House, meaning there's built-in cameras and a full editing suite. All the equipment was already there, and we actually did, I think it was like an 8-camera capture of A Midsummer Night's Dream, and then we edited it, and then we released it probably like a week or so after we had been shut down. It was sent to those individuals who already were paying customers to see Midsummer. That was actually our first sort of, how do we do this? And so everybody was on board because of what had happened, and everybody wanted to do the right thing. But of course, at that time, we didn't think what we were doing was going to be not only the right thing, but the only thing we were going to be able to do for the unforeseen future, right? And so we knew that our season was approaching, and we did receive word that it doesn't look like we're going to be able to do Nutcracker. So in knowing that, we just realized, well, if we're not going to do Nutcracker, it's highly unlikely we're going to be performing for the rest of the season.
And the season runs from
January to May.
I mean, that's pandemic. That's right in the middle of it.
That was right in the middle of the pandemic. So, the planning team just got together and we started to think about, how are we going to do this and what do we want to do? And so ultimately we had a capture of the Nutcracker that was shot with PBS in 2009 or something. Mm-hmm. The company did a really nice capture that we then used for streaming purposes for Nutcracker.
And so the audience, just to be clear, the audience could purchase it's just the same as purchasing streaming anything else. You can Netflix, basically buy your ticket and you've got, you can stream it onto your TV at home. So.
Correct. And so there was a platform put together to do Nutcracker specifically. And it was packaged lovely by the marketing department so that, although you couldn't come to the Opera House, we could bring the Nutcracker to your house. And so there was a whole marketing plan and packaging around that. And while that was being prepared, we really started to plan about what the rest of our rep season's going to look like. And Helgi Thomason had two new ballets planned for the stage. And so he thought it would be great to let's capture those two ballets instead. And they'll be packaged with archives of other ballets that we had planned on doing live. So we were going to package three new films alongside our existing archives. And so he talked to the choreographers, Danny Rowe, who did Wooden Dimes, Miles Thatcher, who did Color Forms, and Kathy Marston, who did Mrs. Robinson. And they were all excited about the idea of filming their work. And what we had to really, I wouldn't say we struggled, but we had to go back and forth, like, are we capturing what they would normally do on stage, or are we creating, in essence, a dance film? And boy, did we learn a lot. And ultimately, we ended up creating dance films and not just a stage capture like what we did with Midsummer Night's Dream when we were closing because of the pandemic.
Well, I love going to SFB, but it was not always easy to get there. The way the season is programmed, there's programs 1 through 8. There's usually, and each program has usually 3 dances. And if I made 2 programs, I felt like that was good. Coming over from Oakland, working, it wasn't always easy. We have watched every digital program so far, and the ones that absolutely had me sitting bolt upright were the dance films, because in Color Forms, you had dancers dancing around the Museum of Modern Art in San Francisco and outdoors, and Wooden Dimes. I thought it was so incredibly creative and innovative to have the ballet. I still loved the ones where it was, one of the captures. So it felt like you were sitting in the opera house watching the ballet. But I just thought, wow, I hope you'll continue to do that, because I may still never be able to come to every program in person, but I would love to have the option to watch some version of it digitally. I think it's such a cool way to bring in a wider audience, and an audience, that's beyond the Bay Area.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, once again, this is one of the takeaways, happy accidents, however you want to sort of position it, that, we've now developed an audience base watching ballet through digital means. With that said, the priority of the ballet is still to get on stage and do it live. I think there's nothing that beats that. But with that said, we've learned so much, and I think everyone has a new appreciation for it. I still think in the ballet world, it's not everybody's cup of tea. People do want that sort of in-person relationship emotionally, physically with the art form. I do miss it as well as from its live standpoint. But what was really great about working on the dance films and with the choreographers, I mean, for the organization, we brought these two worlds of the world of film and the world of live performing arts together. And we both learned from one another. We learned how to work with directors and cinematographers. They learned how to work with dancers and in our sort of world. And so bringing the two worlds together to really hone in and view the world of dance through a lens, because you're now directing what people are going to see and feel through film versus you coming in and watching a full stage, and you're in control of kind of where your head's directed and how you're looking at it. But in film, we're giving you that direction. We're telling you, here's what you're going to look at now. Here's what you're going to look at now. So it's a different relationship. It creates a different feeling. And there was also concern about the length of how long some of these films were going to be, because to sit and watch 15 minutes of dance on film is different than watching it live. And how that story gets translated, and how does that feel, and do people have the capacity or the discipline to sit and watch something for 15 minutes of dance, unless you're a true bona fide dance lover. And even then, I think that could feel really long. The magic of film really gave us as a ballet company the opportunity to think differently about how we want to present dance in the future. And it's been embraced by so many. And yeah, I know we'd like to do more. I think some of it might be project-based. Our priority is definitely to get on stage and perform. But in doing that and knowing the world is starting to feel a little better, we still need to have a contingency in our pocket around how we might kind of do both still. we just don't know what audience behavior is going to be like. And we may need to be prepared to offer some level of digital. I mean, we haven't talked about it in like we're going to do it for sure, but we are talking about it in terms of how do we do both? I mean, it's interesting if you look at some of the big movie houses like Warner Brothers, they're releasing movies to both cinema and to home streaming services because they've realized that, not everybody's going to go there, but we want people to see our films. So ultimately, COVID has accelerated things that were inevitably going to happen. It just happened much sooner.
As an aside, it's been a boon for me because it would not be cool for me during an actual ballet in the Opera House to lean over to my very knowledgeable daughter and say, who's the girl on the right? Did I see her dance in something else? Isn't she married to that other guy? Because I have a lot of questions, Christopher, and she knows the answers and she'll be like, okay, pause. Mom, I like being able to ask questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, we are coming up to the end of our time, but we always like to close the podcast with one important question, which is what one piece of advice do you have for people younger than you, or do you wish you could go back and tell yourself?
That one piece of advice would be to continue to stay true to yourself with your goals and your dreams, and don't let anybody try to derail that, and just really continue to strive for what it is and who you want to be. I know there was a time in my career in going to school, I was questioned, like, I don't know if this is for you, right?
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't even about set or lighting. It was just about, I don't know if this is for you. And I was just like, whoa. That's not your call. That's my call.
Mm-hmm.
And so when that conversation happened early in my career, I was like, no. I'm going to do what I need to do this. But if I'm going to decide that I'm not going to do this, that's because it's my decision and not someone else thinking, I don't think this is for you. I mean, I tell that to my kids today, just continue to stay true to who you are and do what you have to do so you could do what you want to do.
That's great advice. And I appreciate you sharing it with us. I appreciate you sharing your experience of, this crazy time for the ballet. And I will look forward to seeing it in person myself. And I really am grateful for your time today.
Yeah, thank you. I'm happy and that I could do this. I'm glad you invited me. And I do hope everybody gets an opportunity to come see us when we're back on stage.
I'll see you the next time David Byrne plays the Opera House too. You have to come there. I'll buy us tickets.
I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan. So that would be great.
All right.
Maybe we could do a collaboration with David Byrne and the ballet. I think that would actually be better.
I would be under my chair. I'm not sure I would be able to go. So yeah, like the Prince Misty Copeland collaboration. We need more ballet and pop performers working together.
We want to make it accessible. We want to broaden our audience. And if it takes David Byrne or whoever.
If you have to work with David Byrne, I guess you'd make that sacrifice. Is that what you're saying? You're such a giver. You're a giver.
Absolutely. I'm a giver.
All right. Thanks so much, Christopher.
Thank you.
All right, everyone, let's visualize a David Byrne San Francisco Ballet collaboration, shall we? I think if we all close our eyes and chant the words, "This must be the place," 10 times, we'll manifest it. Click your heels too, just for good measure. There are still a few programs left in San Francisco Ballet's digital season for 2021. You can just go to sfballet.org/tickets and you'll see all the information you need about getting in on watching the 2021 season performances at home. You can stream them right to your television. Program 5 wraps up tomorrow, May 12th, and then they're finishing out the season with 2 story ballets, Romeo and Juliet and Swan Lake, and I believe in baseball that's called Sending in the Cleanup Hitters. So check out their streamed performances. They're so beautiful. Let me know what you thought of today's show. I love hearing from listeners. You can drop me a line at dj@midlifemixtape.com or send me a message via Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter at Midlife Mixtape. I don't know if you listened to episode 96 where we were sharing stories of the albums of our lives, but one of the listeners wrote me the greatest email and let me know that she too was in Vienna, same semester as me, probably also walking down the Danube listening to Peter Gabriel. So it was really cool to make that connection. Join me next time when I speak with someone whose specialty is coaching midlifers into taking some time off, or I should say, she helps us get ready so we can afford to do that. Do I have your attention now? Have a great week, and thank you so much for making Midlife Mixtape a part of your audio landscape.
I don't want to be wanna give back. I wanna be free by whatever means. Whatever you want from me, I wanna be. Don't wanna be this, don't wanna be that. Don't wanna give up, I wanna give back. I wanna be free by whatever means. Whatever you want from me, I wanna be. I wanna be free